there are several aspects to the work of the TS that I feel is very important to be aware of and to frequently think over the work of the TS. I remember in Argentina when I was there, I haven't been there for more than 10 years now, but every now and then we would organize some kind of activity, national activity, to discuss the work of the TS. And there are a lot of sources about it. There are 3 very interesting books where this is discussed. Dr. Timney's Principles of the Theosophical Work, Hugh Sherman's To Form the Nucleus. I think now there is an updated version, I don't remember the title. Then Radha Burnier's Human Regeneration. And there are many articles about this subject, and I think it's very important to give some thought to it. There are also some writings by the early theosophies, Anibes and Blavatsky, where they would talk about why the TS was founded and what's the mission of the TS. I think in the last journal, in the last magazine of Theosophia that you have here, one article of mine on the work of the TS has been published, the educational work of the TS. That's also published in the Theosophist originally. So I'm not going to talk about that particular aspect. If you're interested in that, you can read the article. I wanted to talk about some other aspect of the work that has to do with the overall subject that we are exploring this week. To be able to grasp in a deeper way what this aspect of the work of the TS entails, we need to be familiar a little with the human constitution and the different evolutionary cycles. I'm not going to go too much in depth into this, but in the theosophical view, we have different vehicles of consciousness. A vehicle of consciousness is an organization that allows consciousness to manifest. And according to that organization is the kind of consciousness that can manifest. So we have a physical body that allows consciousness to manifest on the physical plane, as in the way that we call physical consciousness or the waking consciousness. There is an emotional body that allows consciousness to express in the form of emotions, desires, and there is a mental body that allows consciousness to express in the form of thinking, and there is a higher aspect of this that we saw the word, the causal body, that is for the higher conceptions. And beyond that, there is another aspect of consciousness. It's normally called buddhi in Sanskrit, B-U-D-D-H-I, which is the principle that represents this divine wisdom. And the idea is that there are different cycles of evolution in which each one of these aspects of the human being are particularly stimulated in its growth. So these are, there are cycles within cycles. The cycles that I'm referring to right now is what is normally called in theosophical literature root races. The root races are these evolutionary cycles within which the different races, as we call them in humanity, appear. So, for example, right now we are in the 5th root race, meaning we are in the 5th evolutionary cycle. And in this cycle, there are the different ethnicities that we talk about that appear in the process of evolution. In the theosophical view, there are 7 of these cycles, and the 6th root race and the 7th root race. When we say root race, it doesn't refer to any race in particular. It's the root of all the races. So all the races that evolve in that particular cycle, they are part of that root race. So at this point, the whole humanity is evolving in this fifth evolutionary cycle. And a new cycle of evolution is about to start. The first presentments, let's say, of this cycle, it is said that will start in a few hundred of years, and then that will eventually blossom in a whole new civilization, but this is more further in the future. So the sixth evolutionary cycle will deal with a new phase of development of humanity. Now, in the Theosophical view, each cycle stimulates one particular principle or aspect of the human constitution. The idea is that in the fourth, what we call the fourth principle was specially stimulated. The fourth principle is the emotional nature. So the fourth root race was a period in which the emotional nature began to be specially emphasized. Then the fifth root race, the one that we are right now in, stimulates the fifth principle, which is the one that follows the emotions. This is the mind. So we can see how our civilization is focused on the mind in the sense of those who are the leaders of our culture are the intellectual people, politicians, scientists, economists. So at this point in evolution, it is the intellectual aspect of humanity that rules. And as I said, there is a new evolutionary cycle that is going to begin in a few hundred years, that is the sixth one. And that cycle will stimulate the sixth principle in human beings, which is this buddhi, the source of spiritual intuition. So the shift in civilization will be from an intellectually dominant leadership in the world to a more spiritually dominant leadership in the world. Now that will take even, hundreds of thousands years to really establish their influence, but this will happen gradually. In the fifth root race is said to have started many years ago, some thousand of years. HPV said even 1 million years ago. And it is only now that we are reaching the peak of the development of this root race, where the intellectually bent people are really having an influence on humanity. So the same will happen with the sixth root race. It will take a lot of time for the whole civilization to flourish from a spiritual point of view, because we are always talking about cosmic cycles. So the time of these cycles is at the level of the geological times, the cosmic times. But anyway, the point is that a shift is beginning to start, or is going to start, from people who are intellectual, being the leaders of the world, to people who are spiritual, that will become the leaders of the world. And Ali Besant said that the Theosophical Society was founded partly as a training ground for these people that will be necessary to begin the germs of the new civilization. So the Theosophical Society was founded as an experiment into which souls from all over the world, without any distinction of race, sex, caste, creed, color, souls all over the world would be drawn into this experiment and this training ground, so that those souls who show that they are able to live with this particular ideal that I'm going to describe can be used in the future to establish this new civilization. The idea is that in the past, new civilizations started with a particular ethnicity of people. But today, the system is different, because now there are not real boundaries any longer. In the past, there were boundaries because people could not move from one point of the world to the other end, in a few hours as we can today. But now with the advance of technology, the new civilization is not going to be started by one particular ethnicity. It's going to be started by people from all the different ethnicities and social positions. What is going to bring them together is their aspirations. So the characteristics of this sixth root race are characteristics that have to do with the ideals of the TS, with universal brotherhood, with a sense of unity, with an attempt to live from the point of view of this spiritual intuition and not only from the mind. And this is how, far in the future, the leaders of the world are going to be. But everything has to start somewhere. And the idea is that those people who are attracted to the TS, and probably some other organizations too that were generated along the way, you have to remember that the Theosophical Society was basically the first organization founded on these principles. In the late 19th century, you had only the regular religions, you had some groups like Freemasonry, basically that, you had some spiritualism, but this new form of spirituality was started by the Theosophical Society. So it's possible that along the way other organizations also can join the movement. But I refer in particular to the TS because we are members of this organization. So the idea is that souls of all kinds are drawn into the TS, and they relate to each other in the TS, and this may become the training ground, and the selection is like a sifting to see which souls show a tendency to the qualities that will be necessary for the next civilization, and then they will be used as helpers in establishing that relationship. So the idea is that our relationship within the TS, and of course eventually in our daily life, but first within the TS, should be such where we learn to relate to each other with these ideals. So in regular life, you have a problem with your neighbor, and normally the dispute is resolved either in court, or with some kind of bullying, or with some kind of aggression. And we may tend to face difficulties within the TS with the same kind of mind, because that's how we grew up, that's what we learn. The idea is that at least within the TS, where we all agree on these ideals, we need to try to learn, to experiment and learn how to solve problems with the theosophical ideals. There are differences. How do we solve those differences based on universal brotherhood, based on a spiritual vision of the situation, not just an intellectual vision, based on a sense of unity? And how do we solve them? Because normally we find that the practical problems are very difficult to solve from an ideal point of view. So when there is a practical problem, we have normally two options. Either we resort to the old means that we know very well, fighting or competition or this or that, or we are so idealistic that we cannot solve the problem. And we say, well, we are all one, compassion, but the problem is still there. The challenge is how to actually solve the problems, how to deal with them, but with the theosophical ideals. Because that is how the world is going to work in the future. But the world is ourselves. We need to learn that. We need some training ground for that. The world is led by the souls. So where are we going to learn about this? This evolution is not something that happens spontaneously. Evolution happens with the effort of the individuals. So the idea is that in the TS, our lodge meetings, our meetings in the different committees or in the national headquarters, all our relationship is exactly there where we have to try and relate in a different way. You will see in the Theosophical Society all kinds of people are attracted. Some are attracted that are very much in tune with the ideas, and some other people may not be in tune with the ideas. And it would be easy to say, oh, these people are not theosophists, and so I don't want to deal with them. But actually the opposite is true, because the world, in the world, will always be different elements. So how do we relate in a different way while having all the elements that are present in the world? You know, sometimes there are things that are wrong, that are being done wrong, and you want to solve them, but if you solve them by using the means that are based on violence or separation or conflict, you may solve the problem superficially, but karmically speaking, you are just kicking the ball into the future, and the problem will come back. You really don't solve anything by those means, and we are not really learning to deal with things from a different point of view. So sometimes there are problems, and sometimes those problems are, it's difficult to solve them without trying to impose our own will. And that may be what we have to learn. The means does not justify, or the end does not justify the means. So I think in the problems within, there is something interesting. I think the way the TS, before I go there, the way the TS was developed or organized, is very purposeful. If you see other spiritual organizations, normally they are organized around authorities that have all the power, in the sense of, if this was a religion and I was a priest or a monk you all come to listen to what I say, you have very little relationship between you. You know, the Sangha, the typical Sangha, it's a community, but it's not a real community, at least how we have it in the West. All people are basically related to whoever is the teacher at the moment. They have very little relationship between them. And basically everybody does what the teacher says, and that's it. And it's very easy to have a harmonious group in that way, because it doesn't involve common interests, working together, solving problems together. In the TS, we don't have authorities in that sense. We have some administrative roles that are taken up by normal people. None of us, for the most part, is trained to be a good president of a lodge or a good president of a national section. We are not like in the external world where a CEO is trained for that. So it is pretty much us taking the different roles and trying to work together for a common aim. And that is a very challenging situation. It's very challenging when we are all the same. We don't have authorities, only temporary authorities. You know, the president has some roles, the treasurer has some roles. But when basically we are all the same and we have to work together, that is very challenging. And I think there is a purpose there. If we had monks, theosophical monks, that they are trained, they live in isolation, they come to the places, they teach, people come and they go, the organization would be far more, smooth or harmonious. But then it would not be fulfilling the purpose of training of the soul, which is one of the purposes of the TS. So when we come together and if we see that something in our eyes is not being done right, part of our duty may be to try to give our contribution and try to enlighten the situation from our point of view and see if that can help the situation. But it's not our duty try to force the situation and impose our view, even if our view is the correct one. Because then what we are doing is the same that the world does. So how do we work in these situations? How do we stimulate whatever we think is good without resorting to some kind of bullying? Either through our willpower, through our knowledge, through our availability of time or money. So how do we do that? I remember there was a situation in Argentina, and Rada Burnier, who was the president at the time, came for a visit, and a group of us asked, this is how things are being done. We think that is not the correct way. We want to do it this way, but there is a lot of resistance from people who are doing it in this way, and we find that the only option we find is just to fight them and see who wins. And Rada said, of course, fighting is never the answer. And she said, if you think that a different kind of approach is the correct one, don't try to destroy the other one. Begin a center of activity that follows the approach that you think is correct. If that approach is correct, it will attract the energy, the vitality that is available for the TS, and that will grow, and that naturally, if the other approach is wrong, will displace the other approach. So by focusing on the good, you can fight the wrong, always keeping in mind that what we think is right and wrong may not be like that it may be just a condition. But we always have to try to act to the best of our perception. If we think this is right, that is what we have to try to do, keeping in mind that may not be right after all. But if we perceive that is right, we have to go in this way, in that direction, but always trying to act in a theosophical way, even if other people are not acting in a theosophical way, or so we think. So if we try to deal with the different challenges that come in our relationship within the TS, and we try to deal with them with our ideals, that is an essential training that we are developing for the time when a whole civilization has to be studied by a group of souls. This is always the case. There are groups of souls that start a new civilization. In Egypt, in Rome, wherever it is, it's always a group of souls. So if we want to contribute to that particular kind of civilization in the future, we have to learn how to do it right now in our relationship with the TS. In the world, of course, we have to try to relate in that way to the world at large, but that is even more challenging because the world doesn't have that ideal, the ideal of dealing with, in a brotherly way. Here in the TS, it's like a little classroom in which at least we say that we want to follow these ideals. We may fail in doing it, but at least we have the intention. So that opens the door for a better trial or a better attempt at doing this. So if we start seeing everything that happens in the TS as a training ground, the whole attitude may change. We should never, in the TS, we should never be fighting for positions. If we really understand, that is the mundane mind. That is the mundane mind that fights for position or recognition in the outside world. Well, in the TS, we have a different ideas. Let us try to work without being concerned about what position I will get, what kind of recognition I will get. Can we try that? In the world, maybe if you don't have a particular position, you don't have money to eat. So it's more difficult to have that attitude in the world, although it is possible, and eventually we have to try that outside too. But that is not the case in the TS. So can we use the TS to learn how to serve without expecting recognition, how to serve without expecting to have a particular kind of service, for example. if we are still working or in the TS and having this power plays, or that shows that we are not really understanding what the TS is about. And of course, it's not that any of us are free from that. That tendency is in the mind of humanity, so it will be in us. But if we take the TS as this great training ground, then we can be aware of it, and by being aware of it, you put it aside and try in a different way. So in this way, the work in the lodges is essential. You know, we can learn theosophy through DVDs, through the internet, through books, but we cannot be trained by those means. We only can be trained by relating to people, working together with people. I remember when I was in Argentina, working in the laboratory where I was working, I always thought, I wish I could have the attitude that I have in the lab, in the TS. Because in the lab, I was like a yogi. You know, I didn't care what happened around, I was calm. But really because I didn't care about the lab. You know, if they did this, fine with me. If they did that, because my heart wasn't there. I was working because I needed the money. I liked science, but just as a personal question, I didn't want to make a career there. But then in the TS, where I really care about what happened with the organization, I always noticed how hard it was to try to deal with things, you know, in a balanced way, without letting myself be led by my desires or emotions or aspirations. So it is important to be engaged in the work, to try to do the best, and try to do it in the right way, in the best possible way. And that training can only happen if we are involved, if we are active, and if we try to do our best in that sense. So I would like this to be more of a discussion. I wanted to introduce with that. What is your feeling about this particular idea? Do you think, because many times the difficulty is that when you may have the idea of relating in this way to people, and some people may behave in ways that you say that is not brotherly, and then we come to the conclusion, I cannot behave in a brotherly way if this person is not doing that. But actually it's the opposite. It is because of that resistance that we can try to pull our inner resources and learn how to deal in a brotherly way with a person that is not acting in that way. If we all act in a brotherly way, then there is no challenge. So what's your experience? What do you think about this idea? Is there anything that you want to say? I have some other points, but I would like for a discussion better.
Pablo, thank you for your ideas. It made me think of when I first came to New Zealand in 1974. I heard about the Hopi Indian prediction that 144,000 rainbow warriors would appear on Earth to teach the peoples of Earth to live together in harmony, in harmony with the environment. And Greenpeace took this on board and consciously named their boat Rainbow Warrior. I was fascinated by that, and it still is working today throughout. The other experiment which I was part of, living in South Africa, was when apartheid was so painful, especially to Theosophists, wherein my lodge, all the Cape Coloured people left our lodge to prevent us from transcending the law. Mr. Mandela in 1994 established reconciliation. And I have to say that, although it's only experimental, in law, our first object is applicable. That I think is an interesting experiment.
Yes, for example, sometimes there are bad consequences of doing the right thing. And we should be, if we are really serious, we should be able to face them.
Yeah.
For example, I heard about this. really don't know the source, but I suppose it's true, that when Hitler came to power, he wrote to George Arundel, who was the president of the Theosophical Society, and he said that he was going to leave the TS alone if they changed the wording of the first object that talks about universal brotherhood and reworded it in a different way so that it doesn't contradict his idea of the supremacy, of a certain people. That otherwise he was going to persecute the TS. So Arundel wrote to the TS in Germany and told them, this is coming, if you can leave, leave. And he answered that he couldn't do that he could not change the first object. And the consequences were not good, of course. Now, I think when we have the courage and the valor to uphold the right thing, even in spite of immediate negative consequences, the karmic cause that we are creating is very, very strong. And even if it looks like a defeat in the present, it is actually a victory for the future. So sometimes in the TS also, there are some situations that cannot be solved by upholding the right attitude. You know that with this attitude, I'm not going to be able to reverse a situation that I think is wrong. But if you have the courage to nevertheless stick to the right attitude, even if you don't succeed, you are succeeding. Because that generates a karmic cause for things to change in the future. While if you resort to wrong means, as I said, we are perpetuating the problem. So it is important to have a knowledge of theosophy and how these things work, because that is what is the support for our action. If we really understand how karma works, then we can trust and we can know what the right attitude is. There was a problem in the US, and the decision that was taken, to me, it was taken in complete ignorance of how life works and how karma works, because there was something that was a liability, and then a decision was made by means of self-protection, when the attitude that could be seen as a liability was an attitude of altruism and of being generous. But the decision taken was a decision of self-protection. If you look at with mundane eyes, that was the decision to make. That's what everybody does in the world. But we should do something different. We should try to act in a different way. If you do know about how karma works, any attitude for self-protection will inevitably generate a cause, because selfishness always generates causes that will tend to attack that entity that is trying to protect itself and separate from the rest. So even if it seems dangerous, in my view, an attitude of generosity is always the right attitude. And if you are generous and something happens, that is part of past karma that was generated, and you have to purge that cause. But your attitude of generosity will generate the right causes for the future. So all these things are very practical. We only need to make the commitment to say, how can we live really following the teachings? Because then that is how we are trained.
It reminds me of the Chinese sacred. Doing the right thing for the wrong reason works in the wrong way. Did everybody hear?
Yeah, she said doing the right thing for the wrong reason works in the wrong way. Yeah.
Yes, I'm just thinking it would be very helpful to bring into the TS this mode of working a few of the techniques which are spectacularly effective, like non-violence communication and open space technology. And there's a range of these things which give people a chance to develop empathy between each other and resolve conflicts. And I think that a degree of two-way interchange would be really productive that way, because those organisations like nonviolent communication, they've got a degree of spirituality, but if there was more cross-fertilisation, I think it would be very productive for both parties.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there are many techniques that it would be useful to be aware of, and they all can help. But essentially, and this but doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the techniques, but essentially, if we are working to change our hearts and minds, then we don't need any techniques. So, as Plato said, when there is love, there is no need for laws. So the techniques are helpful, and I think we can use learn the techniques and try to use them. But I think a problem in the TS is that it's related to, in general terms, each person is different. But I think we have a tendency in the TS, as I said at the beginning, to study more than we practice. When we study, the mind becomes sharper. The lower mind, especially if we don't study in the way that we were discussing this morning, if we study in an intellectual way, which is what we learn from the world, the lower mind becomes sharper. You see, in the countries where there is more members that are careful students, intellectually speaking, there tends to be more intolerance, more criticism, because the mind is far sharper. In countries in which the TS is more superficial, many times there are less conflicts, but it's a state of non-conflict that is kind of passive. There is no conflict, but there is no active work being done. People are there, they get together, have tea, they are all friends, then they leave, and that's the extent of the theosophical involvement. Feeding the mind is a double-edged sword. It is important to feed the mind, but if we don't awaken the heart, which is the higher mind, the buddhi manas, we may become far more dogmatic or critics or intolerant. So I think if in the TS we as individual members commit to try to transform our life, then naturally we start working out the problems in a different way. And then, of course, all the techniques of nonviolent communication and others may help us. But essentially, if we are more committed to individual practice to try to transform our lives, then we will relate to others from that other perspective.
First thing I have to say is that you stirred up a memory when you spoke about Hitler and the Theosophical movement. John Coates spoke to some Theosophists in Hastings. Must have been about 1946 or 47. I was in the room when he told the story of a lady who was carrying a suitcase with Theosophical papers in. And the people were all told by the probably Gestapo agents to hold their belongings up over their heads. What was in that suitcase might have sent her to the gas chambers. She said she couldn't hold the suitcase over her head, and she was allowed to put it down. It was never examined.
Yes, and these are extreme cases, and because of their extremity, they are inspiring. But sometimes it's even more difficult to have that attitude in the small things. When the challenge is huge, then there is some special force and energy that we can pull up. But then when we have to bear with that member that is annoying, because it seems to be a smaller situation. Many times we don't make or try to do our best. It is in the small things where we have to train ourselves. And then when the big things come, if they come, we will be able to face them. But it is in the everyday attitude where we should have an experimental attitude and see, okay, let me try and see if I can deal with this in a different way and see what happens. With no expectations, with no ambition, with no trying to push your way, it is far more important to learn than to win, than to conquer. We are here for the future, not for the present. We are here to train ourselves to help when the time comes to start a new kind of relationship. So whether we win or lose in the present is a very secondary matter. What matters is what we are trying to do. If we can keep this view of eternity, we start seeing everything in a different perspective. After all, if that person gives that lecture that I think is not theosophical, is not important, in the sense, not that it's not important what we teach people, but it's not as important as, or so important as to drag me into having the wrong kind of attitude.
I'm just wondering, you travel quite a bit around the TS, and I'm really curious as to whether what you're speaking about now is an ideal Theosophical Society, or one that you actually encounter anywhere. I mean, I ask that because I don't find the TS all that focused as what it sounds like listening to you. I wish it was more focused. But at least in the Australian section, anybody coming along to a TS meeting in most of our lodges would be very hard pressed to get any kind of an idea whatsoever about theosophy. And I just think somewhere along the way we've kind of lost the plot. So just really the question is, what you're saying, is it wishful thinking, or is it something you've actually encountered anyway?
It is something that I experienced, but unfortunately for most of the TS is an ideal. We are not there. But I grew up maybe because we were young, I grew up in Argentina. There was a big youth group. There were about 100 of us around the country. There were different youth lodges around. We worked together a lot. We had our own magazine. We did our own lectures. It was like a mini TS. Many of them are still very active in the TS. And we faced the same problems that I faced in the adult lodges later. But we faced all the problems in a different spirit, and it worked. And I remember sometimes long meetings dealing with problems, 3 or 4 crying, and trying to see how we could solve this in the right way. And we always did. We found a way, and we are even today the best of friends, even if some of us are in different parts of the world. And it really worked. Maybe, as I said, maybe because we were all young and you have less of the conditioning of life at the time. But it was a wonderful experience that showed me this is possible. And then in the lodges, I've been in some lodges that were quite good and some others that weren't. Even in Argentina, I've been in different lodges because I moved to different cities when I was living there. And some of them, I just couldn't believe that, the way they related was so mundane, so to say, with the same patterns. And some others were good lodges. What I noticed is that normally the lodges that were more serious about the study were the more conflictive ones. And I thought about that for a long time, and I tried to understand the dynamics, and I'm convinced that the problem is that most people were very intellectual, and none of them were really keen on trying to apply the teachings to daily life. They thought that was just a psychological lower aspect. What we need is to know theosophy, and the application was something lower. But then I've been also in lodges that were very loose about the study, and they were very harmonious. Everybody was a friend of each one, but it was very superficial. So it's difficult to get to the right balance between, the being precise in the way you think, and yet being tolerant and open. And I think it is possible. I have the feeling that is our next step as organization. I think we as organization, we go through different cycles. We started in a very occultist way with HPB. Then we went to an intellectual phase with Bess and Wheeler, although they also talk quite a bit about occultism. But I think they set up they spread the teachings in a way that more people could study them, and I think we enter into an intellectual phase. Then perhaps with Sri Ram and Radha and Krishnamurti, there was a phase more psychological and trying to see how to apply certain things. I feel that now we have to integrate all of this. We have to integrate the study with the psychological approach, and keeping these occult principles as a guide in our life. And I hope that we are moving in that direction. I see some signs, but it is us who have to do it. If you see the leadership in the TS, we start, and this is said even in the Mahatma letters, every new movement, some special souls are born there to guide the new movement. But then the idea is that the movement can become self-organizing, not as a kid that always needs the dad or the mom to guide it. So if you see, we had great leaders like Blavatsky and Bess, and then another generation of great people too. From a certain point of view, they may be, they were not as Bess and Blavatsky. For example, we have Sri Ram. He was a wonderful person, very wise, but maybe a different kind of leader. And Gina Rajadasa, and then we had Radha and Joy Mills, and if you see, the leaders are progressively less awe-inspiring and more like us. So I think the TSR is moving into a position in which we are the ones that have to do the work, not just following a leader. A leader is great, maybe inspiring, but it generates certain dependency. So in the current TS, we are the ones that have to do all this, each one of us, and then that will vitalize the TS globally. It's not a question of having an inspiring leader.
There's a quote I've heard of Madame Blavatsky saying that all physical existence is subservient to the spiritual. I think I have that word perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know just where it was written. I think it is a quote that we need to be sitting up and taking notice of, and turning it around. When we have a physical situation that doesn't seem too good, and there are plenty of those around if we study the environmental issues, we have this problem, the physical situation. Think back to what is the spiritual problem or lack of spiritual insight. I can throw you one from your own country, and we have it just the same here. But I've seen a photograph down from space on the Uruguay River, sending the soil out at least as far as Montevideo, and I think out into the Atlantic off Punta del Este. You had the physical situation. Think back to the spiritual thinking that is leading to all this problem. We've got it everywhere. And we've got people in so many places who are picking up answers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think the model of life as a school that I talked about at the beginning is very, very, very important, because I mentioned some of the models of different religions, life as a prison or an illusion or the school. Our current culture's model, I think, is life as a place for attainment, where we are here to win, we are here to conquer, we are here to attain, to defeat. That's how our current culture sees life. And then all that matters is the result. So when we are in the TS, we unconsciously have the same frame of mind, and we think that what we need to do is to impose our will, to make things happen the way we think is right, even if we have the right intention, because for the most part, most people have the right intention, a good intention, but not the element of wisdom is lacking there. So we think that what is important is to get the results, to get things done. If we change the chip and we start thinking that what is important is to learn, if you fail or win is a secondary matter. What is important is to learn how to do things in the right way. If things go your way or the other way, it's not important. The TS is guided by far higher powers than our own little wheels. The TS doesn't depend on me being able to change how this member sees things. There are far higher powers that are guiding this. My role in the TS, yes, is to try to stimulate things in the right direction, but it is not me the one that has to impose those results. So if we see that what we have to do is to learn how to relate in the right way to any circumstances, then we have some freedom from the tyranny of the results. And we can say, even if I fail, this is the right thing to do. I always remember Professor P. Krishna. He's a member of the Theosophical Society, but is more involved with the Krishnamurti Foundation. And he was talking about the Krishnamurti education. And somebody asked him, so do you think that the students are well prepared to deal with the world when they finish their education? Because they don't have tests for the students, they don't encourage competition. So somebody asked that, which seems to be a completely normal and reasonable question. And he said that wasn't really his concern, that if he really thought that this is the right way to educate people, that he had to do that no matter what, even if the results are not the ones that the world expects. So that reminds me, Krishnamurti used to say, if you are well adjusted in a crazy world, then there is something wrong with you. Because it's not the question of just trying to fit in. So I think that what we need to keep in mind always is that this is a school. What is important is not to get things done, to get results. If I truly believe that this is the way to live, I'll try to stick to this, regardless of the consequences. Of course, we all have limits. We may go further or not so much further according to our strength. Where we get, it doesn't matter again. It's not the result, it is the attempt. Somebody wants a person in the evaluations of the classes said that each one of my answers was like a lecture in itself. I guess he or she was a little frustrated.
If you see me doing this, it's because I know where this is going.
I'm not quite sure how to word this, but so I'll just speak. Within the branches, there often appears to be, and these are just opinions and observations, often someone who is very, all I can say is like a fundamentalist theosophist, where the rules and the regulations and the, everything is very black and white for them. And when you suggest new ideas that don't fit in with their idea of this black and white, they're completely squashed. Now, one then faces a situation where one either is very forceful and assertive and instills their will on, or tries to, on the other person who has mostly a lot more will, or backs away and just lets it lie. So for me, I find when I have these ideas, and I'm more of an idea sort of person, that when they hit up against this brick wall where you can't do this because it's black and white, whereas my interpretation is that you definitely can, I either bend and say it's not worth my energy and I don't have any personal interest in doing this, I want to do it for the society, or I can create a conflict. And I don't like either option. Can you suggest a third alternative?
Yeah, I faced that situation many times. Maybe people faced it with me many times, I hope not. But what I always try to do in those situations, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, is to try to open a new space for the activity. Sometimes I want in my lodge to work in a certain way, or the public lectures to be in a certain way, and then you find resistance. In time I realized that sometimes I was right and sometimes I wasn't. Sometimes with more experience I realized that they were right, although I didn't see it at the time. But nevertheless, as I said, I think it's fair to try whatever seems right to us, if we are honest, and think that this is worth trying. So what I try to do is, well, they didn't want the lectures to be like this. I thought they were very dry and intellectual in some lodge, and they were allergic to the idea even of putting the seats in a circle, and so I thought I proposed to have an activity on a different day, that it was not the official day of the lectures, and let me try this little experiment. And obviously I was by myself, nobody helped me with that, but I started doing whatever I could, and in some occasions that really took off, and it influenced the way that the lodge ended up working, and sometimes it didn't. Many things don't depend on you only. In each result, the whole universe is playing causes, and yours is only one there. But it's always worth trying, because your very trying generates a seed for the future. So if you think it's worth your effort, I think what Radha said was full of wisdom, and at the time I remember thinking that would never work. But what she said, try to open something new, don't fight the old. I thought, if you don't fight the old, it will never end, because the old was the dominant. But I respected Radha, and I thought, I'll try it, and I think it was full of wisdom. So that may be an alternative. I would say, don't go into conflict. If you think it is worth applying your energy and try to see if you can get your own space to do that with one friend, with two friends maybe, or I don't know in particular what you are referring to, but see if you can find an alternative instead of trying to. I remember sometimes even changing the way the seats, the chairs where they are, and the member that had been sitting on that chair for 30 years would drag the chair to the same place. Well, you can let go of those things. Don't try to change if you find resistance, things that are established, but start something new that is not restricted there.
It's often an interpretation of what they think should be happening.
Yeah.
And it's only their very black and white interpretation.
Yeah. Another thing that I tried is to find a quote in some theosophical writing that was supporting what I was saying that we should be doing, and I said, look, Radha said this, or Besan said this, or Blavatsky, so I want to try this. That's sometimes
Pablo, I just want to say you have to be careful with that, though, because you also have to be willing, which you are, you have to be willing to be attacked then, or be thought of. A lot of times, we want people to like us, or we want to suggest something, and then for it to be easy. And it's not always like that. Sometimes when you do what you say, you get nothing but attacked. And
that is part of the training. I mean, I remember in Argentina, everybody studied the secret doctrine, but there was very little about practice in where I was. So I started giving talks on Krishnamurti and things like that. Never gave a talk on the secret doctrine there. And I know there were some members saying, what Pablo is saying is not theosophy. And a friend of mine called one of the members to ask for advice about some books. And this older member said, I'm glad that you are studying real theosophy because what Pablo is doing. But if you see, those are such silly things, that's fine, who cares? I mean, it's part of our training, you work for the master, you work for humanity, not for what the members say. But it's true, yeah, what we should say. Yeah, we have to finish, there is one person there.
I just want to make an observation, and I have to do it. Your difficulty, Pablo, is that you came into Theosophy as a youth, and you've got all the ideas for the future that the run-of-the-mill people don't have. It's the young ones who are the future, and we're just the guardians for them, so we need to listen to the young ones. So it's interesting to me to hear such a fine person as you came out of a youth group.
Yeah, but I always found support from many of the older members too. I was never alone in that sense also, so that is true too.
It's interesting what happened in Auckland. The Auckland branch is called the Auckland branch, and then I can't remember how long ago, but it was a long time, it was in the early 1900s, that there was a great disagreement, and the group went off and formed the HPB branch. And slowly, HPB branch grew, and Auckland branch wound down. And that was done in quite a peaceful way. So, it's a very valid point that you make there. Interesting one too. Yeah. So think of that, the door lodges, and there's always ways to do things to different nights.
Yeah, and it can be done without antagonism, in the sense that sometimes when lodges break, there is a lot of antagonism. Once that we had to do that, and we can go into the other lodge too and say, we are not, saying what you do is useless and we are better than you and we are forming another group. We want to have a group to try in this way. We still appreciate this way too, so you don't generate the antagonism.
Anyway, it's past morning tea time. I just want to thank you, Pablo, for sharing those thoughts with us, and thank you all for also sharing.